Apple just did something that the AI world did not expect. They pulled vibe coding apps from the App Store, which is essentially saying, we don't trust what these tools produced. If you bet on SaaS stocks getting hammered further with pure fear that AI is about to make every software company obsolete, Apple just show you why this fear is entirely irrational. I went through several highly reputable software trends reports, security audits, and academic research to understand what's actually happening when AI code meets the real world. I found 4 undeniable reasons and much supporting data that AI kills SaaS argument is wrong, and I'll walk you through each one of them. And yet, that's the opposite of what the stock market is pricing in right now. But first, let's start with what Apple actually did and the detail that most of the news coverage missed. Apple and the vibe coding drama. A few things happened in quick successions in late March. Within a few weeks, in March 2026, Apple quietly blocked updates to Replit and other vibe coding platforms, even removed Anything, that's another vibe coding app, entirely from the App Store, citing Guideline 2.5.2. This is actually one of the Apple's long-standing rule that apps cannot download, install, or execute code that changes their features after being reviewed by the App Store. Some of these apps were suspended for a few weeks and only being restored by April. The CEO of Epic Games called this action from Apple stifling innovation. As many other news outlets also include CNBC or The Information, said that Apple was on the wrong side of the story. Of course, the company, Anything, that got taken down said it was surprised and disappointed. These are emotionally powerful arguments, but they all assume that the AI vibe coding tools are producing high-quality, harmless apps. And the thing that most of the coverage missed is why the assumption is fatally flawed. Now, here's the flip side of the story that the critics' anti-innovation claim conveniently forgets. What about, let's start with App Store's submissions surged 84% in Q1 2026 compared to a year earlier, making this the largest spike in a decade. And Apple had already rejected nearly 2 million of app submissions in 2024 alone. Or you can think of it this way. Apps like Facebook or Pokemon Go are like restaurants that passed their health inspections. The menu changes regularly, maybe new dishes or new specials, exactly like the posts you've seen on Facebook or the game content you found on Pokemon Go. There are news from time to time, but the kitchen is the same kitchen that the inspector signed off on. However, a vibe coding app in a restaurant analogy is like allowing its customer to tear down the kitchen and rebuild it every night. The inspectors approved the kitchen on Monday maybe, but by Wednesday, there will be a new gas line, a new wire, and such that the restaurant inspector just didn't sign off on. The app that passed Apple's review process is often not the same one as what the users end up running. And that's exactly what the Guideline 2.5.2 was always meant to prevent. It's not a new rule, but a rule that suddenly matters a lot more. If Apple is really anti-AI, then they wouldn't even add any AI coding tools from Anthropic or from OpenAI directly to Xcode, their own developer platform, just 2 months ago. Now, let's examine whether Apple was justified. Because this really depends entirely on how well AI-generated code performs in live system. And that's where the data gets damning for the AI kills SaaS crowd. Now, sharing is caring, so make sure you share this video to someone you care. And if you see the hype button under my video, please hype it so other people can also see it. Now, get back to the content. Let's follow how software actually gets built. Here's what happened when an AI coding tool was left unsupervised. A founder was using Replit's AI agents to build their own application. During a code freeze, basically a period when there was no change was supposed to be made, the AI out of the blue decided to fix something that nobody has asked it to touch. It ended up deleting an entire production database, including over 1,000 executive records, and left the app paralyzed. It's just like you thought you hired a plumber to stop a dripping tap, but then you found out that they tore out the entire load-bearing wall while you were asleep. The Replit lesson sets the stage for the data I'm about to walk you through. Now, AI's gift for writing code is really a dangerous distraction. Yes, It's the one thing that it does undeniably faster than humans. But if the rest of the process is flawed, the speed only accelerates the destruction. Stage 1, coding. AI is fast, but too bad. Speed doesn't equal quality. Now let's think of software like building a house again. Yes, AI can put up walls incredibly fast. I'm not here to dispute it, but you do need more than walls to make a house, don't you? However, this is the headline you keep hearing, that AI writes code faster, so we don't need engineers anymore, it will replace developers' jobs, and every company can now even write their own SaaS tools. And that is a statement actually you will only make if you never worked in software. On top of that, you probably need to also ignore everything else in the development process. This data I'm about to show you demonstrates the Black Mirror style irony, because the people who were doing the work didn't even realize that the result is actually worse than if they did it manually. METR is a very well-known non-profit organization that tracks AI's progress. They brought in some very experienced developers to work on some tasks as an experiment. As you can see in this image, this is their experiment design. When being asked after the experiment, those developers believed that they'd been 20% faster. Yet the truth is that the developers using AI were actually 19% slower than those coding manually. The reason identified is that AI knows code in general, but it has no clue about your specific system. And the experienced developers spend actually much more time in correcting those AI guesses than they would if writing the code themselves. That said, it is true for many tasks, it feels much easier somehow via AI, like editing an essay instead of starting from a blank page. So many of us have started to trade speed for comfort. And here's what makes it worse. It's just like editing a written essay instead of starting from an entire blank page. Many of us have actually traded speed for comfort, but didn't notice the trade-off. And here's what makes it worse. A security team scanned more than 5,000 live apps built with AI vibe coding tools. They found over 2,000 critical vulnerabilities and 400 exposed passwords and security credentials available for anyone to grab. Not to mention that personal data like medical records or bank account numbers was accessible to anyone who looked. Don't worry if those numbers don't really speak to you. Here's a takeaway. 60% of those 5,000 apps were vulnerable. It's pretty much like there was no lock on your window, keys hanging by the front door, and sticky notes with your bank account and password and shouting out to everyone that you have a prostate cancer. Stage 2, checking. 2/3 of the vibe coding apps failed inspection. Before any code goes live, it must be checked. That sounds sensible, right? Again, it's just like any inspection. However, the result for AI code are grim. Just like when you speak with a chatbot, you will realize that it keeps adding extra paragraphs when you only asked for a yes or no answer. AI code assistants tend to spit out nearly 3 times as much of code as human would, but a lot of it is low-quality filler. Here's the largest 2026 study of how AI-generated code reveal a series of insights of how AI impacts positively or negatively software practice. Only about 1/3 of AI-generated code survived the first review, while human-written code passes inspection more than 80% of the time. Let's think of it as a construction project again. It's like 2/3 of the houses built by this new construction method failed their own building inspection. You wouldn't call that a revolution in construction. You call it a crisis. Not to mention, the inspection itself takes much longer. Reviewers takes more than 5 times as long to review AI-generated code. They ended up dedicating more time in checking than they used to spend time in writing the code themselves. AI didn't reduce the workload, it increased it. Stage 3, distributing. Your buyer has questions that AI can't answer. Now, if we were building houses, stage 1 and 2 happen inside the construction site. But at some point, you have to sell what you've built, and buyers have their own inspection process. Every company that buys software, regardless a startup with 500 headcounts or a Fortune 500, goes through procurement. And the bigger the company, the harder the questions get. Is it secured? Does it actually solve the business problem? How would it be maintained? How are updates delivered? How much is the penalty if the software doesn't work as specified? And this is far from being wish list items. Many of those are strict pass or fail controls. And every piece of data we just walked through is exactly the thing to screen for, or later to be fined for. So when I was evaluating operational software, the question that ended more vendor pitches than anything else wasn't about price or features. It was, show me your security posture, show me your architecture, explain how your team maintained this, and what metrics that we can track the maintenance. A vibe-coded product certainly doesn't have good answers to any of those questions. But I get it, because most of the time you probably never heard of any of these rejections on the news. But that's because they all happens in a meeting room and they're boring, they're not headline worthy. Now, for once, it finally made it to the headlines because Apple runs the same process, just at a consumer scale. Yes, Apple hosts the App Store. However, in this topic, we should think of its role as curating apps, just like a news outlet or a Netflix curates their content. When a harmful app slips through, it's not only the developer's fault, especially when an app causes harm, leaks your personal data, or show kids apps that they aren't supposed to download. The responsibility lies with the platform that approved it as much as with the developer. So that's why the Guideline 2.5.2 exists. And when app submissions surged 84% in Q1 2026, almost entirely driven by AI-generated apps, of course, Apple is going to block them. It makes me wonder whether those journalists or CEOs who oppose this block would take any responsibility when things goes wrong. Now, stage 4, maintaining. Paying off one credit card with another. Let's say a vibe-coded product somehow passes procurement and clears Apple's review. What happens next? Google surveys thousands of software professionals every year in order to understand how software teams actually perform. In the 2024 reports, they found that every 25% increase in AI software adoption was associated with a 7.2 drop in delivery stability. They see the same pattern in 2025, if no worse. As you can see in this spider chart, within the both cluster of fundamental challenges and the legacy bottleneck, there are spikes in software delivery instability. In plain English, the more code a team writes, the worse the software stability gets. Here's what they said on the report. Yet, our data shows AI adoption not only fails to fix instability, it is currently associated with increasing instability. And on the contrary, instability still has significant detrimental effects on crucial outcomes, like product performance and burnout, which can ultimately negate any perceived gains in throughput. Yes, there is no lack of news and consultants citing numbers such as 55% of more productivity boost data from GitHub, or the developers now work twice as fast from McKinsey. A lot of them, however, came from controlled experiment and isolated tasks rather than from live systems. When the MIT Sloan Management Review interviewed CEOs across the industries, what they found is something really different. They found that AI-generated code scaled into real system creates compounding technical debt that destabilizes the whole thing. The translation here, AI code is paying off a credit card with another one. The improvement claim, but AI is getting better. Now, you might say, okay, the current tools have problems, but AI is improving, right? The answer is yes, however, only in one dimension and not the ones that actually matter. AI has learned to write code that doesn't immediately fall over. A recent software report found that AI has gotten really good at writing code, at writing small snippets code that run without errors. But it's not getting better at writing code that's safe from hackers, nor does it have a contextual understanding of what's going on in your existing system. And on the other hand, if you look at the security pass rates, it was 55% in 2023 and still 55% in spring 2026. 3 years of revolutionary model releases moved the security dials 0 point. And some categories are even getting worse, moving towards the wrong direction. And here's how Yann LeCun described how the current AI models work. It's reactive. There's no reasoning.
For this search mechanism, what you have is you have to kind of bolt this on top of it, right? So one way to do this is you get an LLM to produce lots and lots and lots of sequences of answers, right? Sequences of tokens which represent answers, and then you have a separate system that picks which one is good. Okay, this is a bit like writing a program by sort of randomly, more or less, generating instructions, while maybe respecting the grammar of the language, and then checking all of those programs for one that actually works. Not a good way, not a very efficient way of producing correct pieces of code. It's not a good way of reasoning either.
The model produced one word after another based on pattern that I've seen before, but it doesn't have any understanding of what a piece of code does. And that's the difference. It's like the AI in 2026 has memorized what houses look like on paper, but it has never lived in one. So it can reproduce a shape of a window, but it doesn't know that window needs to be opened, the glass needs to be double layered, or the frame needs to bear weight. So it generates code that looks right. It doesn't generate code, however, that is right. Until these models stop guessing what code should look like and start knowing what code actually does, this won't get better. The people building these models know it. The question is, how soon will reality catch up with the companies that rushed to release AI-generated code? Also, one thing on everyone's tongue. So what does it mean for SaaS? The logic behind AI kills SaaS goes like this. AI makes code free and fast. Anyone can build software. Existing software company loses their advantage and SaaS is dead. Every single part of that chain actually breaks if you were ever part of a software development team, or if you dig into the reports that aren't from consultancy or the model companies themselves. Writing code is always the cheapest part to build a software. What's costly is to make it right, including building the right thing for the right audience, making it secure and reliable, getting it reviewed and approved, maintaining it over time, and earning the trust of your buyer who need compliance audit trail and security track records. The list goes on. Yes, in the last 3 years, AI has made the cheap part cheaper. However, as every data points that we've talked about, it failed drastically in handling any of the expensive parts. If anything, it made them more expensive, more code to review, more security flaws to catch, and more instability to manage. And not to mention harsher burnout for the developers. Apple is the first gatekeeper to say, I'm not taking the risk, I'm going to block this. But what you can't see is that Apple actually isn't the first and won't be the last. So the answer to what does it mean for SaaS? Contrary to the public belief, AI doesn't weaken established software companies. It strengthens them because the incumbents already have battle-tested code, security track records, compliance certifications, and teams who actually know what their software does and what their clients need. A vibe-coded app challenger, however, has none of those. Meanwhile, the last data point here, there are 64% of the developers actually distrust what AI produces, and it's up from 31% a year ago. The current market, however, is pricing in a future where AI makes software companies obsolete. Why? Because market is just a collection of human insanity in numbers. Now, I'm building a series of why AI doesn't replace X, explaining from all fronts of why SaaS isn't dying and why you aren't going to lose your jobs. Subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when there's any update, and watch my autopsy of